They called her the Silent Woman. For 7 years, she had walked the same corridors, cleaned the same offices, and spoken to no one unless absolutely necessary. Her name tag read Maria Santos, cleaning services, and to everyone at the federal building in downtown Phoenix, that's all she was. A middle-aged Hispanic woman with graying hair, callous hands, and eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. But when the distinctive metallic click of a timer mechanism echoed through the marble hallway at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, Maria Santos stopped mopping and became someone else entirely. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because every story we share here deserves to be remembered. The J. Edgar Hoover Federal Building in Phoenix was a fortress of bureaucracy, housing everything from FBI field offices to immigration services, from DEA operations to the U.S. Attorney's Office. 37 floors of marble, steel, and secrets, where thousands of federal employees process the daily business of justice in America. And for the past 7 years, Maria Santos had been invisible among them all. She arrived every morning at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before the first shift of federal workers would begin filtering through security. Her supervisor, Janet Kowalski, barely acknowledged her existence beyond the weekly schedule and the occasional complaint about missed trash cans. The security guards knew her face well enough to wave her through the checkpoint without a second glance. To them, she was furniture, necessary but unremarkable. Maria was 43 years old, though the harsh lines around her eyes and the silver threading through her black hair made her appear older. Her cleaning uniform was always pristine. Navy blue polo shirt, matching pants, comfortable shoes that could handle 8 hours on marble floors. She moved through the building with the efficient silence of someone who had mapped every corner, every office, every hiding place where dust and secrets accumulated. What no one knew was that Maria Santos had been listening. For 7 years, she had cleaned around classified conversations, emptied wastebaskets full of shredded documents, and observed the daily rhythms of federal law enforcement with the trained eye of someone who understood exactly what she was seeing. Her English was perfect, despite the slight accent she maintained for appearances. Her knowledge of federal procedures was encyclopedic, despite never having set foot in an academy or training facility. The truth was that Maria Santos didn't exist. The woman pushing the mop cart through the halls of the federal building was Staff Sergeant Isabella Vasquez, formerly of the 39th Explosive Ordnance Disposal Company, United States Army. She had defused improvised explosive devices in Baghdad, Kandahar, and a dozen other places whose names appeared in classified reports but never in newspapers. She had saved hundreds of lives by cutting the right wire at the right moment, often while under enemy fire. Isabella had officially died in a convoy attack outside Fallujah 4 years ago. Her death had been a necessary fiction, created by people whose names appeared on no organizational charts and whose offices existed in buildings that weren't supposed to exist. She had been given a new identity, a new life, and a new mission to watch and wait inside one of America's most sensitive federal facilities. Because someone, somewhere, had intelligence suggesting that the Phoenix Federal Building was a target. The morning of September 12th started like any other. Isabella arrived at her usual time, badged through security with her worn ID card, and began her daily routine on the building's lower floors. She started with the parking garage, checking for anything unusual among the hundreds of vehicles belonging to federal employees. Nothing seemed out of place. The same cars in the same spots, the same patterns of arrival and departure that she had memorized over thousands of repetitions. By 7 a.m., she was working the lobby level, emptying trash receptacles and cleaning the marble surfaces that gave the building its imposing appearance. Federal workers began arriving for the morning shift, most of them absorbed in their phones or lost in thought about the day ahead. Isabella observed them all with peripheral vision, while maintaining the invisible presence that had kept her alive for 7 years. Agent David Chun from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit nodded to her as he passed, the same polite acknowledgement he had given her every morning for 3 years. Deputy U.S. Attorney Sarah Martinez hurried past with an armload of case files, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Assistant Director Robert Hayes from the DEA stepped out of the elevator with his usual expression of controlled urgency. Another man carrying the weight of classified knowledge and impossible decisions. Isabella had files on all of them, mental dossiers built from 7 years of careful observation. She knew their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. She knew which ones stayed late working sensitive cases, which ones had family problems that made them potential security risks, and which ones could be trusted to keep their mouths shut when lives were on the line. What she didn't know was that today would be different. The first sign of trouble came at 2:15 p.m., when Isabella noticed a maintenance worker she didn't recognize. She knew every janitor, every electrician, every contractor who had legitimate business in the building. The man was wearing proper credentials and carrying appropriate tools, but something about his movements set off alarm bells in Isabella's trained mind. He was too careful, too aware of his surroundings. Real maintenance workers move with the casual efficiency of people who belonged in their environment. This man moved like someone who was constantly calculating escape routes and threat vectors. Isabella had seen that kind of hyper-awareness before in soldiers who had spent too long in hostile territory. She began following him at a distance, using her cleaning card as cover while she tracked his movements through the building. The man spent exactly 12 minutes on each floor, methodically visiting specific locations with no apparent maintenance requirements. He was mapping the building, learning its layout, identifying key structural points. Isabella felt a familiar cold knot forming in her stomach. After 4 years of waiting, her real mission was about to begin. The man completed his reconnaissance and left the building at 3:15 p.m. Isabella watched from a lobby window as he walked to a van parked 3 blocks away, far enough to avoid security cameras, close enough for a quick approach. She memorized the license plate and the man's physical description, filing both away in a mental database that had kept her alive through multiple combat deployments. 32 minutes later, at 3:47 p.m., Isabella heard the sound that changed everything. She was on the 15th floor, cleaning offices for the U.S. Attorney's White-Collar Crime Division, when it reached her ears. A soft metallic clicking, barely audible above the ambient noise of a busy federal building. Most people would have dismissed it as the settling of old pipes or the cycling of an air conditioning system. Isabella knew better. She had heard that exact sound in a market in Kabul, in a schoolhouse in Ramadi, in a dozen other places where someone had hidden death inside an innocent-looking package. It was the sound of a mechanical timer, counting down to detonation. She abandoned her mop and began moving to the corridors with predatory silence, following the sound to its source. The clicking was coming from somewhere on the 15th floor, but the building's maze of offices and conference rooms made pinpointing the exact location challenge. Isabella moved systematically, using techniques she had learned from years of hunting hidden explosives in urban environments. The sound was strongest near the center of the building, in an area housing senior prosecutorial staff. Isabella narrowed her search to a conference room used for high-level case coordination meetings. The room was currently empty, but she could hear the timer mechanism clearly now, its metallic rhythm steady and inexorable. She found the device hidden inside a coffee service cart that had been wheeled into the conference room sometime during the afternoon shift change. The bomb was sophisticated, military-grade plastic explosive, surrounding a complex timer mechanism designed to resist tampering. Someone had invested serious money and expertise in this attack. Isabella estimated she had less than 8 minutes before detonation. She pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through the contact list until she found the number she had hoped never to use. The call was answered on the first ring. Phoenix Command. "This is Nightshade," Isabella said, using the code name she hadn't spoken in 4 years. "I have a confirmed explosive device in the federal building. 15 floors, conference room 1547. Military-grade construction, approximately 7 minutes to detonation." There was a brief pause as the voice on the other end processed this information. "Nightshade, are you certain of your assessment?" "Confirmed. I need immediate building evacuation and a bomb disposal team. But the timer won't wait for backup." "Understood. Evacuation is commencing now. Nightshade, you are not authorized to attempt disarmament. Repeat, do not engage the device." Isabella looked at the bomb, then at the conference room windows that offered a view of downtown Phoenix. Thousands of people worked in the surrounding buildings. The federal building was located in the heart of the business district, surrounded by high-rises full of innocent civilians who had no idea that death was ticking away 30 floors above their heads. "Negative, Command. I'm going to disarm it." "Nightshade, that's a direct order. Evacuate immediately." Isabella disconnected the call and turned off her phone. She had been taking orders for 20 years, but some decisions couldn't be made by people sitting in secure command centers hundreds of miles away. This decision belonged to her. She knelt beside the coffee cart and began her examination of the device. The bomb was elegant in its lethality. 5 pounds of C for a plastic explosive wired to a digital timer and what appeared to be a secondary triggering mechanism. The timer showed 6 minutes and 18 seconds. The secondary trigger was more troubling. It looked like an anti-tampering device designed to detonate the bomb if someone tried to disarm it incorrectly. Isabella had seen similar configurations in Iraq, where insurgents had learned to protect their improvised explosive devices from coalition bomb disposal teams. The technique was simple. Wire a motion sensor or vibration detector to the main charge, so that any attempt to move or disarm a device will result in immediate detonation. But Isabella had also learned how to defeat such devices. The key was understanding the bomb maker's psychology, recognizing the shortcuts and assumptions that even professional terrorists made when building their weapons of mass destruction. She began tracing the wiring harness with her fingers, feeling for the telltale differences in wire gauge and insulation that would indicate the primary versus secondary circuits. The main timer was connected through heavy gauge wire designed to carry the detonation current. The anti-tamper system used lighter wire, more delicate, easier to cut if you could identify it correctly. 5 minutes remaining. Isabella found what she was looking for: a thin green wire that connected the motion sensor to the main detonation circuit. If she could cut that wire without triggering the sensor, she could disable the anti-tamper system and proceed with disarming the primary timer. The problem was access. The green wire was buried beneath the main explosive charge, protected by the very device it was designed to safeguard. Isabella would have to physically move the C for her to reach the wire, but moving the C would trigger the motion sensor, unless she could fool the sensor into thinking nothing had moved. Isabella pulled out her cleaning supplies and selected a small bottle of industrial adhesive from her cart. Working quickly, she began applying tiny drops of glue to the motion sensor's internal mechanism, using a technique she had learned from a particularly innovative insurgent device in Mosul. The glue would harden in seconds, freezing the sensor's internal components in their current position and preventing them from detecting movement. For minutes remaining, the adhesive set with satisfying quickness. Isabella gently lifted the explosive charge and slid her hand underneath to reach the green wire. Her fingers found a thin strand of copper and plastic, tracing it to its connection point. She pulled out a pair of wire cutters from her cleaning kit. Not standard janitorial equipment, but Isabella had never been a standard janitor. 3 minutes remaining. Isabella positioned the cutters around the green wire and took a deep breath. This was the moment when years of training and experience either paid off or killed her. She had cut hundreds of wires and dozens of explosive devices, but each one still required absolute concentration and perfect technique. She squeezed the cutters. The anti-tamper circuit died with a barely audible click. Isabella allowed herself one moment of relief, then focused on the primary timer. 2 minutes and 47 seconds remaining. Disarming the main device was more straightforward, but required extreme precision. Isabella traced the timer's wiring to the detonation circuit, identifying primary power source and the backup battery that would maintain the countdown even if main power was interrupted. She would need to cut both power sources simultaneously, within milliseconds of each other, to prevent the timer from defaulting to immediate detonation. 2 minutes remaining. Isabella positioned wire cutters on both the primary and backup power lines. The cuts had to be perfectly synchronized. Too much delay between them, and the timer's fail-safe would trigger detonation. She had practiced this technique hundreds of times in training, but never under quite these circumstances. 1 minute and 30 seconds remaining. Isabella counted down from 10, then cut both wires simultaneously. The timer's digital display flickered once and went dark. The red LED that had been blinking in rhythm with her heartbeat faded to black. The bomb was disarmed. Isabella sat back on her heels and allowed herself to breathe normally for the first time in 20 minutes. Around her, she could hear the building's fire alarm system blaring as the evacuation continued. Through the conference room windows, she could see emergency vehicles assembling in the street below. Fire trucks, ambulances, and the distinctive black SUVs that indicated federal response teams. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She turned it back on and answered. Nightshade. Status report. Devices neutralized. Building is secure. There was a long pause before the voice responded. Outstanding work, Nightshade. Bomb disposal team is en route to collect the device. Your orders are to resume cover identity and await further instructions. Understood. Isabella disconnected the call and looked around the conference room. In a few minutes, the building would begin returning to normal operations. Federal employees would file back to their desks, resume their phone calls, and continue processing the daily business of justice in America. Most of them would never know how close they had come to dying. She gathered up her cleaning supplies and wheeled her cart back into the hallway. The evacuation was still in progress, but emergency personnel were beginning to establish a command post in the lobby. Isabella took the service elevator to the basement and made her way to the parking garage, where her supervisor, Janet Kowalski, was waiting with a clipboard and an expression of bureaucratic frustration. "Maria, there you are," Janet exclaimed. "Where have you been? We got a building evacuation, and I can't find half my cleaning crew." Isabella looked at her supervisor with the same neutral expression she had maintained for 7 years. "I was cleaning the 15th floor when the alarm started. I came down as soon as I could." "Well, they're saying it was a false alarm, but we're going to be here all night cleaning up after this mess. I hope you're ready for overtime." Isabella nodded and began pushing her mop cart toward the elevator. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever you need." As the elevator doors closed, Isabella caught a reflection in the polished steel. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning. Maria Santos, cleaning lady, invisible and unremarkable. The only difference was in her eyes, where someone who knew what to look for might have seen the satisfied gleam of a job well done. 3 hours later, the federal building had returned to normal operations. The bomb disposal team had removed the disarmed device. The emergency vehicles had departed, and federal employees were working late to make up for the afternoon's disruption. Isabella finished her cleaning rounds and prepared to leave for the day. As she walked through the lobby, Agent Davidson approached her with an unusual expression on his face. For the first time in 3 years, he actually seemed to see her as a person rather than a piece of human furniture. "Maria," he said, "I wanted to thank you." Isabella looked at him with carefully maintained confusion. "Thank me for what, sir?" "One of the FBI techs told me that someone had already started working on that device before the bomb squad arrived. Whoever was knew exactly what they were doing, probably saved a lot of lives today." Isabella's expression didn't change. "I don't know anything about that, sir. I was just cleaning." Chin studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course. Well, have a good evening, Maria." "You too, sir." Isabella walked out of the federal building and into the warm Arizona evening. She had been Maria Santos for 7 years, and she would continue being Maria Santos for as long as her mission required. But today, for 20 minutes, she had been something else entirely. She had been the difference between life and death for thousands of innocent people. And tomorrow, she would go back to being invisible. As Isabella drove home to her small apartment in South Phoenix, she reflected on the events of the day. The bomber had been sophisticated, well-funded, and professionally trained. This wasn't the work of a lone wolf or a disorganized terrorist cell. Someone with serious resources and advanced technical knowledge had targeted the federal building, which meant today's attack was probably not the end, but the beginning. Isabella parked her car and walked up the stairs to her apartment. From the outside, it looked like the modest home of a working-class cleaning lady. Sparse furniture, basic amenities, a small television, and a shelf of romance novels in Spanish. But behind the bedroom closet, accessible through a hidden panel, was a different world entirely. The hidden room contained equipment that Maria Santos couldn't possibly afford or explain. Encrypted communication devices, weapons, surveillance gear, and a computer system connected to databases that officially didn't exist. Isabella sat down at the computer and began typing her after-action report. Operation Nightshade. Date September 12th. Location Phoenix Federal Building. Threat neutralized. Status cover maintained. As she typed, Isabella wondered how long she could maintain her double life. 7 years of being invisible, of listening to conversations she couldn't act on, of watching threats develop, while pretending to be nothing more than a cleaning lady. It was a kind of deep cover assignment that broke most people within 2 years. But Isabella wasn't most people. She was a survivor, a professional, and someone who understood that the most important battles were often fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Package delivered successfully. More packages coming soon. Isabella stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. The bomber, whoever he was, had just confirmed her worst fears. Today's attack had been a test, a proof of concept. There would be more devices, more threats, more moments when a line between life and death would come down to her ability to cut the right wire at the right time. She powered down the computer and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, she would be back in the federal building by 5:30 a.m., pushing her mop cart through marble corridors and emptying wastebaskets full of secrets. She would be invisible again, unremarkable, just another face in the crowd of people who kept America running. But she would also be listening, watching, waiting for the next metallic click that would transform Maria Santos back into the weapon she had always been. Because somewhere out there, someone was building another bomb, and when they were ready to use it, Isabella would be ready to stop them. The silent woman would be waiting.